Hi everyone, I'm Bill Graham. Welcome back and thanks for watching. Today we're going to continue our series on Barry Harris's added half-step models. Last time we talked about things to play on dominant chords. Today we're going to talk about some things that we can play on tonic chords in both major keys and minor keys. So let's get right to it. Okay, so let's get started by talking about the half-step rules that we can play on a major chord. So if we start on the root, we're going to add a half step between the 6th and the 5th. Remember, these are just for descending scales. Okay. If we start from the 2nd, we could add no half steps. Or we could add 2 half steps between the 2nd and root and the 6th and 5th. If we start from the 3rd, we could add 1 half step between 6 and 5. Or 3 half steps between 3 and 2, 2 and 1, and 6 and 5. Okay, if we start from the 4th degree, we could add no half steps. Or 2 half steps between the 2nd and root and the 6th and 5th. Okay. If we start from the 5th degree, we could add 1 half step between 6 and 5. Or we could add 3 half steps between 3 and 2, 2 and 1, and 6 and 5. If we start from the 6th degree, we could add 1 half step between 6 and 5. Or we could add 3 half steps between 6 and 5, 3 and 2, and 2 and 1. Okay. When it comes to starting on the 7th, there are a number of different options. We could put just 1 half step between 6 and 5. We could put 2 half steps between 6 and 5 and 2 and 1. This way we end up, instead of ending on the 7th, we're going to end up ending on the root. I also like putting those 2 half steps between 3 and 2 and 2 and 1, and getting rid of the one between 6 and 5. And I also like putting those 2 half steps between 7 and 6 and 6 and 5. Alright, let's try practicing all of those in a row. Let's start from the root with a 1 half step. 2, 3, 4. From the second with no half steps. From the second with 2 half steps. From the third with 1 half step. From the third with 3 half steps. From the fourth with no half steps. From the fourth with 2 half steps. From the fifth with 1 half step. From the fifth with 3 half steps. From the sixth with 1 half step. From the sixth with 3 half steps. From the seventh with 1 half step between the 6 and the 5. From the seventh with 2 half steps between the 6 and the 5 and the 2 and the 1. From the seventh with 2 half steps between the 3 and the 2. And from the seventh with 2 half steps between the 7 and 6 and the 6 and 5. Let's take a look at some more things that we can practice on major chords. So if we start on any note and run up the scale and then run back down, we're going to use the rule for the note that we started on. So let's say that we're starting on the 1 and we run up to the 2 and then start coming back down. We're going to apply the rule for the 1. Let's say we start on the 1 and we run up to the 3. That same rule. How if we run up to the 4? Same thing. Up to the 5. Same rule. How about up to the 6? Same thing. And up to the 7. Or up to the root. Okay. And so that's going to be the same thing if we start on any note. So let's say we start on the 2nd. Let's run up to the 3rd and back down, and we're going to use no half steps. Or 2 half steps. Okay, how about if we run up to the 4th? No half steps or 2 half steps. Okay, how about if we start from the 3rd? Or if we go up to the 5th? All that same set of rules for the 3rd. How about if we start from the 4th? half steps, 2 half steps. Okay, all the same rule for the fourth. And if we start from the fifth? The same 2 rules. Okay, starting from the sixth with 1 half step or 3 half steps. And lastly, from the seventh. For right now, I'm just going to take one option. That's going to be the 2 half steps between the 7 and 6 and the 6 and 5. Another thing we can do is we can jump up a third from any note and then resolve down, and we're going to use the rule for whatever note we resolve down to. So like if we start on the 1 and jump up to the 3, we're going to resolve down to the 2, so we can use either no half steps or 2 half steps. Okay, let's jump up from the 2 to the 4. Then we resolve on the 3, so we could use 1 half step or 3 half steps. Okay, let's jump from the 3 up to the 5, and we land on the 4, so we could use no half steps or 2 half steps. Now how about from the 4 up to the 6? We land on the 5, so we could use 1 half step or 3 half steps. Now if we jump from the 5 up to the 7, we land on the 6, so we could use 1 half step or we could use 3 half steps. And then if we jump from the 6 up to the 1, we're going to end up on the 7. So we've got plenty of options. Let's try the one where we put a half step between 6 and 5 and 2 and 1. Or how about when we put it between 7 and 6 and 6 and 5? Nice. Okay, now let's try playing up a triad from each scale degree and then coming down the scale with some extra half steps. And we're going to apply the rule either for the note that we start on or for the note that we resolve to, which is going to end up being the middle note of the chord, the third of the chord. So let's start by playing up a triad from the 1 and then coming down applying the rule for the 1. Okay, so that makes sense. So we came up a triad from C, and then we just walked down using our rule for the 1. Or we could also use the rule for the third, which is going to be 3 half steps. Okay, now let's try going up a triad from the second. Let's do no half steps. Or 2 half steps. Now how about a triad from the 3? Let's do 1 half step. Or 3 half steps. Okay, how about from the 4th? Let's do no half steps. Or we could do 2 half steps. Or we could also apply the rule from the third of that chord, which is the 6th of the chord. So that was just 1 half step. Or we could do 3 half steps. Slowly. Okay. Let's come up a triad from the 5th. That was with 1 half step. Or with 3 half steps. We could also use the rules from the third of that triad, which is the 7th of the overall chord. Let's try some of the different 2 half step combinations. Or okay, let's try going up a triad from the 6th. Let's start with 1 half step. And now we can try it with 3 half steps. Okay, and then let's play up a triad from the 7th. Or we could use a rule from the third of that chord. let's try coming up a 7th chord from each scale degree. So if we start on the 1st scale degree, we're going to resolve down to the 6th. So let's use our rules for the 6th. First, 1/2 step. And then 3/2 steps. Cool. Let's come up a 7th chord from the 2nd degree, which is going to have us resolving on the 7th. So let's try some of the different options we've got for the 7th. Or all right. Now let's come up a 7th arpeggio from the 3rd, which is going to have us resolving on the tonic. So let's use our only rule we've got available here, which is 1/2 step. Okay. Now let's come up from the 4th. We're going to end up on the 2nd degree. So let's start with no half steps, or 2/2 steps. All right, let's come up from the 5th now. And we end up at the 3rd. So let's add 1/2 step, or 3/2 steps. If we come up from the 6th, we end up on scale degree 4. So let's try no half steps, or 2/2 steps. And then if we come up from the 7th, we're going to end up on the 5th. So let's use 1/2 step, or 3/2 steps. Sometimes when you're playing a longer line, you have to change rules in the middle of the line. Like, let's say we're starting from the 4th using no half steps. If we just keep going for 2 whole bars, we end up on the 9th instead of the root. And we want to make sure that we're ending up on a chord tone. So 1, 2, 3, 4. On the next downbeat, we have to change to a rule for the note that we land on that next downbeat, which in this case is the 3rd. So we can use no half steps, but now we're going to use 1/2 step, or no half steps, and then 3/2 steps. So that's real important. Another important thing to practice is what Barry calls pivoting. So what we're going to do, let's go back to those 7th chord arpeggios. And for each chord, we're going to practice playing up at 1, 3, 5, 7. But we're also going to practice playing that first note up an octave. So any line that we would play starting with that first chord, we got to also practice By the way, all this stuff that we've talked about so far on the 1 chord also will sound great on the 3 chord or on the 6 chord. Now let's talk some about some things that we could play on a tonic minor chord. These are some rules that I learned from another YouTube channel called Things I've Learned from Barry Harris. If you're not already subscribed, you should absolutely go and subscribe to him. He's got some great lessons. So this is on a harmonic minor scale. The first rule that we're going to learn is if we're starting on the tonic, there's no extra half step between the tonic and the 7th that we can add because the 7th of the scale is already a half step below the tonic. So what Barry does is he jumps up to the next available note in the scale before continuing down. And that's a great, elegant solution. Okay. If we start from the 2nd, first of all, we could add no half steps. Or we could add 2 half steps between the 2nd and tonic, and then our little move where we jump from the tonic up to the next available note and then continue down. If we start from the 3rd, we could add that 1 step after the tonic. Or we could add 3 half steps. So after the 3rd, in this minor 3rd, there's no extra half step to add between the 3rd and the 2nd. So we're going to do that same move of jumping up to the next available scale tone. And then add a half step after the 2nd, jump up to the next available scale tone, and then continue down. Okay? If we start from the 4th, we could add no half steps. Or we could add 2 half steps. Starting from the 5th, we could add 1 half step. Or 3 half steps. Starting from the 6th, we could add no half steps. Or we could add 2 half steps. And in this tonic minor chord, we can play a natural 7th and think of it as a chord tone. Okay, and then lastly, we're going to start from the 7th. And we can add 1 half step. Or we could add 3 half steps. Let's practice all of those one after another. 2, 1, 2. I know this video is supposed to be about tonic chords, but I have to point out how good all of this harmonic minor vocabulary sounds on the 5 chord in a minor key. So let's play all of this C harmonic minor stuff over G7, or like G7 altered of some kind. We've got a flat 9 and a flat 13, but we could have a flat 5 also. It doesn't really matter. Resolving back to C minor 6. All of this harmonic minor on the 5 chord vocabulary also sounds really good resolving to a major 1 chord. So let's try practicing playing C harmonic minor over the 5 chord, going to C major on the 1 chord. We're starting from the 2nd. From the 3rd, from the 4th, from the 5th, from the 6th, and from the 7th. Or even. Let's practice running up and back down from each scale degree. Remember that we're always going to apply the rule for whichever note we started on. Okay, starting from the 2nd, with no half steps, or with 2 half steps here. No half steps, 2 half steps. 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 All right, now let's start from the 3rd with 1 half step, with 3 half steps, 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 1 half step, 3 half steps, 1 half step, three half steps. Okay, let's start from the 6th with no half steps. Or with 2 half steps. With no half steps. 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 With 2 half steps. Okay, and then now let's start from the 7th with 1 half step. With 3 half steps. 1 half step, with 3 half steps, 1 half step, 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 3 half steps, cool. Let's practice playing all the triads in the harmonic minor scale now. So let's come up a triad from the 1st degree. Or we could do that with 3 half steps. Let's come up a triad from the 2nd degree. Let's do no half steps. That'd sound good over the 5 chord. We could also add in some extra half steps. Let's say we're going to play or over the 5 chord. That sounds great. Okay. Let's try coming up a triad from the 6th now. Okay. That sounds a little bit funny over the 1 chord, but it's going to sound great over the 5 chord. Cool. And then lastly, let's come up a triad from the 7th. Or we could add some extra half steps in there. Now let's practice the 7th chords. So if we come up a 7th chord from the root, we're going to end up on the 6th, so we could use no half steps, or we could do 2 half steps. Okay, let's come up a 7th chord from the 2nd degree. And we end up on the 7th, so we could use 1 half step, or we could use 3 half steps. This also sounds really good over the 5 chord. All right, let's play up a 7th chord from the 3rd degree. So we end up at the root. We could play that over the 5 chord. Let's try coming up a 7th chord from the 4th degree. We're going to use no half steps. It's also going to sound good over the 5 chord. We could also use some extra half steps in there. Or over the 5 chord. Okay, let's try playing a 7th chord on the 5th degree. So let's use 1 half step. And of course that'll also work on the 5 chord. Okay. We could also use 3 half steps. Play that on the 5 chord. Cool. Let's play up from the 6th. So we wind up on the 4th. Let's use no half steps. This is going to sound good on the 5 chord. Cool. We could also use 2 half steps. Cool. And lastly, we're going to play a 7th chord arpeggio on the 7th, where we're going to have a diminished 7th arpeggio. This is going to sound great on the 5 chord. Cool. We could, of course, also use some extra half steps. All right, I think that's about enough for this time. Next time, we're going to take a look at applying all of these half-step rules on major and minor and dominant chords to actually playing a solo on a real tune. So let me know in the comments if there's any tunes in particular you'd like me to take a look at applying this stuff to. Please make sure to like and subscribe. If you have any questions, just leave them in the comments below. If you're interested in taking Skype lessons, send me an email at BillGrahamMusic@gmail.com. Thank you so much for watching. Have a good one. We'll see you next time.